Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your perspective. And gaining a perspective on cybersecurity within commercial real estate is the intent of today's session. Specifically, there is an increased need for commercial real estate owners to provide smart buildings. Smart or connected buildings provide the greater benefits of operational efficiency and tenant experiences. But once the buildings are connected, the risk from cyber attack is now introduced. It's an honor and a privilege to be your moderator for the next hour. My name is EJ von Schaumburg. I am the Vice President of Business Development at Digitalware. And with me today are four distinguished guests: Ed Cabrera from Trend, Lucian Niemeyer from Building Cybersecurity, Ben Grippy from MetLife, and Mark Zikra from CA Ventures. Ed, let's get started with introducing yourself, but first let me thank Lucian and the IoT world for giving us this opportunity to speak today.
No, fantastic. It's great to be here, and it's a great opportunity for us to be able to sponsor our discussion. So my name is Ed Cabrera. I'm the Chief Cybersecurity Officer at Trend Micro. I've been at Trend for over 5.5 years. I work in many different areas, similar to my previous employer, where I was 20 years with the U.S. Secret Service, working in cybersecurity programs and leading many different other ones, to include our forensics program, our network intrusion responder program, but also I did a little bit of time over at DHS as an advisor to the NKIC and ICS Cert and US Cert. Rotating back, I became a deputy and then finally CISO for the Secret Service. At Trend, we have a plethora of products and solutions, and OT and IT and OT and the convergence of therein is this one opportunity for us to be able to continue to do the work that we do on the research side, but also on the solution side. And so at Trend, I work with our research and development teams, our product teams, but really primarily with our customers to be able to provide that level of expertise that they need.
Lucian?
Yeah, absolutely. For an introduction, yep, Lucian Niemeyer, currently the CEO of a nonprofit organization called buildingcybersecurity.org, recently established to advance physical safety and security in a smarter world. So we're getting after that issue. You have to be smart, but you also have to be safe and secure. Formerly Assistant Secretary of Defense for the last 4 years, where I ran the largest real estate portfolio in the world, over $1 trillion. And I firsthand was concerned that if something were to happen in the cyber attack in a facility within DoD, I'd probably end up losing my job. I also worked at the White House for the last 6 months, working on a range of national security issues to include the cyber risk to critical infrastructure and facilities.
Ben.
Good afternoon, everybody. Ben Grippy with MetLife Investment Management. I lead innovation for the real estate equity platform. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. We have a platform that consists of more than 30 billion in US AUM across all the major sector types, including office, hospitality, retail, and also industrial. So happy to share experiences on cyber. I know the panel here, we've talked quite a bit about this, and I have a lot of strong opinions and be happy to share what MetLife Investment Management is doing to help protect ourselves.
That's excellent. Mark?
Great to be here. Thanks, EJ. Mark Zikra, Senior Vice President of Technology and Innovation for CA Ventures. We're a real estate investment company and multiple verticals ranging from multifamily to student housing, senior, industrial, medical, office, commercial. And my primary job right now is focusing on building the technology stack and fully integrated technology stack in our real estate assets. We're across the globe, trying to identify ways to maximize benefit for resident engagement, operations, and our investment, while maintaining safety and security from a cybersecurity standpoint, and making sure that as we grow the technology, all the different parts of IoT, both in our assets and outside in the surrounding areas, that we're doing it safely, and we understand what we're opening ourselves up to from a risk standpoint, and being able to mitigate and pay attention and be ahead of it.
Thank you for those introductions. My first question will go to Ed. The previous session went through very good job on understanding the operational efficiencies of smart buildings. But given the recent much publicized news on ransomware attacks, especially on the OT side from Colonial to JBS to McDonald's, are the adversaries that good, or are we just ill prepared for this new threat? Love to get your perspective on that.
No, that's a great question. It's actually one we have or discuss quite frequently. Are we not doing it enough, or are they, have reached a level of capacity or, to be able to leverage these types of attacks? I think it's both, right? So arguably we have challenges consistently to protect our IT and our enterprise systems. I think what has changed over the last 15 years is this evolution of ransomware attacks, and starting from locker type ransomware attacks to the ones we've been seeing since 2016, which is a little bit more nefarious, related to the encryption version of those attacks, right? So crypto attacks. This is just an evolution of capability that has been coming, bubbling up from this whole structure you find in the cyber criminal underground. They basically have been leveraging all types of attacks, stealing data, parsing data, and reselling it. I think the unique thing and the challenge thing here is as we as organizations have a converged IT and OT strategy going forward, specifically around building automation is one of that first steps an organization might take go at to build out their automation piece. This is where the challenge is digital extortion as a cyber crime. The monetization is shortened, right? Typical data breaches take anywhere between several months to actually be monetized, because the data has to be identified, exfiltrated, parsed, and then resold. With digital extortions, the impact is immediate, and it has an impact that reverberates across an organization. And so now what we're seeing is traditional organizations that have had less of a monetizable footprint to cyber criminals. Now they become very rich targets because they're really focused on operations, right? For them to have uptimes is critical. So anything in critical infrastructure, anything in healthcare, anything where you need your uptimes to be, there should be no downtimes or very little downtime, so to speak, now become great targets for these individuals and groups. And so I think this has really changed the landscape as we start dealing with how do we now go from reputational risk to now we have an operational risk that is real and prevalent. And now it's spilling over into the OT side. And now a lot of the attacks haven't even touched the OT side and the critical infrastructure side of the house, ICS systems and so forth. However, because these systems are so interdependent and interconnected, that even attacks on the IT side, as we've seen, has a huge impact across the board.
For our audience, the difference between IT and OT, can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So IT, information technology, traditionally, we talk about in terms of, your commodity type of computer networks systems that are organizations utilize to conduct business and operations. OT, operational technology, now that is more has been in the past talked about from a critical systems perspective. In other words, industrial control systems, SCADA networks and systems, meaning those are the systems that move pumps, valves, and they are essentially running the operations of an organization, being a manufacturing or distribution, you name it. That has really been the historical connotation of OT. Now with building automation, where we're at is these systems that control HVAC, security and control systems, a lot more other systems that within an organization, power, that are really critical, are now much more interdependent, interconnected. And so OT in terms of that operational technology, especially in the building automation side, might take the form of, IoT is what we're talking about. These commercial off-the-shelf thermostats, lights, actuators associated with different types of systems. So that's pretty much a quick rundown between like an OT side of the house, traditional definition, and what we're probably going to be talking about here today is more of this mixture of IoT and industrial IoT.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ed. Lucian, given your unique perspective, being a former Assistant Secretary of the Navy, working at the Pentagon and White House, and you had the opportunity to see a full range of threats, including threats to our critical infrastructure and facilities, the potential attacks to use smart buildings to hurt or physically harm someone. Given that risk, what can be done about it? Can you tell us about building cybersecurity as an organization? You're on mute. Lucian, you're on mute.
There we go. I appreciate, DJ, the question. It's absolutely spot on. And I think Ed laid it out really well. We're looking at an age moving forward where IT and OT are going to converge. The questions are the common practice in the past of creating firewalls and air gaps. Bottom line, 2010 called and they want their cybersecurity back. I mean, we're no longer there. We can no longer rely on those types of protections. We have to move to the next generation, and that's ensuring as our hardware vendors are putting the technologies together, and as they're integrating into either a building or an asset or infrastructure or whatever in the built environment, a smart car, that they're working with the software folks to come up with a collective way to address security and safety for the human, whether it be an occupant, whether it be a tenant, or any type of human experience. And that's really where BCS, my organization, was stood up last year, is how do you take the standards that are out there? And there are government standards, there are private sector standards. How do we take them and put them together in a way that a normal person can understand, and more important, offer a choice to a consumer on to what degree you want to have your OT protected? We all buy, protection for our computers to limit or mitigate the risk of a software attack or malware attack. But we don't necessarily have anything to help us or protect us, or at least warn us of an attack to operational technologies can potentially harm somebody or cause property damage. So that's really what this organization does. We have some of the most amazing experts working with us, folks from the Center for Internet Security, folks from companies like yourself, Digitalware, Nozomi Tenable, Intelligent Buildings. We've got partnerships with associations such as International Society of Automation, National Electrical Manufacturers Association, and most important, we have an alliance with BCS, with insurance companies. Ben being a big part of that with MetLife, but also a co-founder of our organization was Aon, the largest the insurance broker in the world. So seeing what we can do that goes beyond, and by the way, also led by Johnson Controls, who's a big contributor to BCS as well. Seeing what we can do to move beyond the idea of investing in cybersecurity to mitigate risk, but actually to use those investments to create a return on investment for a CEO. What can be done to encourage and incentivize the adoption of cybersecurity practices that will end up having a impact on insurance rates? As we know right now, the cyber insurance policy, I'm sure Ben's going to talk about this a little bit, is in a state of quandary, to say the least. Ransomware attacks are skyrocketing, creating a pretty uncertain risk for the future of the cyber insurance world. And we anticipate, because we BCS are kind of skating to where the puck's going to be, not where the puck is, we anticipated eventually those ransomware attacks are going to move quickly into threats upon operational technologies, such as elevators in buildings, fire suppression systems, physical access, HVAC, actual controls that could put somebody either at risk or at harm's way or cause some other type of property damage. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now in organization. What can we do, taking the existing standards, create an overarching framework that's easy to understand, easy to implement, and tie the technologies that we're looking at for the next generation of smart buildings and the next generation of prop tech, tie those in with the processes, how they're designed and integrated, and ultimately how they're maintained over the life cycle. So that's really what BCS has embarked upon. So from my perspective, coming from the Department of Defense, it's absolutely critical that we look for ways not just to protect our essential government functions and critical infrastructure, but we have to protect our schools. We have to protect our apartment buildings. We have to protect our homes. We have to, go wherever we think a cyber criminal is going to go. It's not a nation state, but cyber criminal, where are they going to go to look for that payoff? Right now, real estate seems to be a premium, high asset value, relatively low awareness of cybersecurity protections, easy targets for ransomware attacks to seize an elevator or seize an HVAC system and say, hey, we're going to create tenant fear or uncertainty if you don't pay us. We're BCS as an organization is trying to get in front of that by incentivizing those protections ahead of time and getting a return through either through marketability of the protections and or input or support from the insurance industry. We do believe, and I'm setting Ben up for a pretty good discussion, we do believe that insurers, underwriters, and brokers have a desire to want to work with their clients to bound risk, to mitigate risk, and ultimately offer policies that are affordable. Right now, we're looking at the cyber premiums going up significantly, insurance premiums, to the point where not a lot of companies are going to be able to afford that. And that is what we need to change that dynamic. Would you rather put your money into a framework and an adoption of a standard that we're working on right now? And would you prefer to mitigate your risk as opposed to continue to pay for increasing levels of insurance? One other thing which is important for our organization is that we do plan to have our first framework out this summer. We've had a dedicated group of professionals working every day to come up with what will be the first framework. And we're looking forward to be able to show our BCS members, you want to get an insight, you want to get a peek under the tent, then join our organization now to get what that framework looks like before we roll out to our first vertical organization, which is commercial real estate. We'll eventually move into healthcare, we'll move into transportation systems, move into devices, robotics and automated processes. But we're starting with real estate because we think that's the greatest need right now for the immediate protection of our people. Again, cybersecurity is not just a IT issue that for an intellectual property data, but it's also an OT issue where somebody can actually get hurt. The water attacks in Florida, a perfect example of that, where an OT attack can have a direct impact on life and safety. And that is what we're trying to do. How do we incentivize protections against that?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lucian. Let me turn to Ben and Mark as it relates to being the owners of these properties and the guys that have to sift through the technology and figure out how to put it in and how to protect it. But most recently, you look at COVID and the impact of COVID to your business. I'm sure that has caused you guys to reassess risk in general for your assets, the properties themselves. As you transform to smarter connected buildings, how do you think about cyber risk in that larger context of risk? And how does that get added to the equation? Ben?
Good question, EJ. And I want to really quick before I go there, I was going to jump in while Lucian was talking around underwriting. I think on the insurance side, one thing I want to address is that there's just general misunderstanding or miscalculation in the underwriting, if you ask me, around what cyber risk really means for an insurer. And so what Lucian highlighted is the need for the sort of all of the stakeholders to get together and really understand how to mitigate the risk and how to alleviate the burden of the underwriting on the insurance industry, to be honest. So I think that's really important to highlight. But yeah, I mean, if you go through the journey of what prop tech has been in the last 4 or 5 years in commercial real estate. First of all, there's been an explosion in venture capital money that's been chasing many different technologies, right, across the spectrum, whether it be access management control, smart HVAC systems, which I think Lucian highlighted those earlier in the conversation. You name it. Even elevators have been, significantly upgraded with technology over the last couple of years. And people like Mark and I spend all our time, evaluating vendors that we think, best fit in our prop tech stack, call it. So if you're going to have a premier asset, a CBD, central business district office building. What do you need to put in that office building to make sure that your tenants are happy there, that you have, limited roll off when leases come up for renewal, that they are renewed, and also that the asset can be differentiated against its peers, right? So if there's another office building across the street, Why would someone want to work in your office versus the one, that you're competing with? And in my opinion, a lot of that secret sauce comes down to a consistent prop tech strategy. And EJ, what you highlighted, I think, is kind of sort of flying under the radar in that most of these prop tech strategies require the deploy of tremendous amount of IoT, right? So we go from an analog building. There certainly was technology in buildings over the last couple of decades, right? But most of that technology was not internet connected. So it was contained to the systems within the building. And so the risk was, it was pretty limited. But what's been introduced over the last couple of years is internet connected, right? Because as an owner, or as a building engineer who works at the property or any of the other stakeholders, the idea that you can operate the building remotely in some cases, the idea that it can feed back an enormous amount of data and information to you that you can use to help make decisions and optimize the management of that building. All of that requires, that technology be internet connected, that you can access it from someplace other than inside the building. So, and then obviously those technologies, one other thing to highlight, and I'm sure Mark will get into this on multifamily, there's a lot of ecosystem plays, right? So if you buy a technology for your office, let's say for access management control, you might want that technology to play really well with your sensor technologies that count the occupants in space. And those APIs, all those connections between technologies create vulnerabilities, right? So every time you connect one thing to another, you're creating a chain of vulnerabilities in your building. And I think that complexity is what, Mark and I grapple with every day in our roles. So cybersecurity is an important piece of whatever strategy you decide you want to roll out across your portfolio. And I'll recall a conversation, EJ, you and I had in DC a couple of years ago around why it's so difficult, right? So you have networks, even if you have a building that's not that smart, but has some internet connectivity. Those networks are at the behest of a lot of vendors, and those vendors generally don't want to even upgrade their system, their software, because it might cause other things to break in their network, right? So they kind of stay on earlier versions of software. They don't upgrade, they don't patch. And I believe it was when we talked with one of our guys that is kind of an expert in this, wasn't it around 98% of preventable hacks are as a result of unpatched frameworks that are in place? Is that accurate, EJ?
That is correct. Misalignment or misconfiguration of the tools that you have in place.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's huge. And that's a simple thing, right? I mean, if you're communicating with your property teams around patch maintenance and stuff like that, you can eliminate a ton of risk at the building level just through a simple program, of that construct. But I don't know. I mean, there are some owners who are very good at this and have already sort of pushed ahead with cybersecurity programs. I would highlight, Boston Properties does a great job. I was actually talking with them this morning about this. Oxford does a really good job because they have a tech stack around cyber, right? So it's not just prop tech; it's a layer to support all the the prop tech that you want to plug in at the property level. So really complex. It's kind of, I guess that's my intro, but I would hand off to Mark. And Mark, where do you stand on multi and housing?
I guess before we get into that, let's just from a clarification perspective, define commercial real estate as we see as the different property types, right? When I think of commercial real estate, I think of the office building I'm walking into, but it's a much larger swath. So just comment on that for a second, and then Mark, we'll get into your specific property types.
Yeah, it's a good point, EJ. It's a really big community of real estate that we're talking about. So it's office buildings, right? Whether they be in the central business district or if they're suburban or anywhere else. It's multifamily assets, and that's including the high rises you see in New York City, the garden style you see around the corner from you in your suburban neighborhood. It's industrial, which is huge, right? Because industrial is connected to so many of the really big tech players, right? The Amazons of the world, for instance. It's retail.
Yep, retail, hospitality. There's a bunch, right?
It's all of them, and honestly, the alternative sectors too have really grown in importance since COVID, because now everybody's investing in single-family rentals, everybody's investing in self-storage, data centers, another huge one. So, I mean, the scope here is tremendous, and MetLife has quite a bit of exposure to all those sectors we just mentioned. I know, Mark, maybe I'll hand off to you now on sort of the multifamily side of it.
I was just thinking that I need you to do the intro to everything that I ever talk about, because that is everything that I was going to say, and I don't have No, Ben, that's fantastic. Ben and I have known each other for a long time, and we talk regularly about a lot of this stuff and the importance of not just technology, but being secure. My primary focuses are around multifamily and student housing, one of the different sectors of the many that were just outlined. But to me, thinking about this from the standpoint of where people live, where their homes are, where all of their sensitive information is on their computers and their devices at their homes and their IoT and everything that exists in the physical spaces that they live. It's a huge focus for us as we look at, and EJ, I want to kind of jump back to, your original question around COVID and how that impacted the technology design and thought process going into the construction of new assets and existing assets. And, it really made a big impact in the entire industry. And I'll speak a little bit about from our standpoint at CA Ventures. For a long time, I think that we were perceived a little bit unique, where we had a technology and innovation team dedicated to furthering the specifics around all of our smart home tech, our CCTV, our access control, our internet infrastructure in our buildings. And that was our job. That was it. That was what we were hyper focused on, building out our technology infrastructure in all of our buildings. And whenever I'd speak with other groups, it would constantly be the conversation of, oh, that's awesome. Like, we need to do that. We need to have teams dedicated to cybersecurity and to building technology and innovation. And when COVID hit, you saw an escalation of that. Now all of a sudden, everybody's realizing, and the real estate industry as a whole is starting to adopt that technological change and accept that as a massive need to be prepared for anything in the future. With that comes the explosion of connected devices. It comes with building automated systems. It comes with access control and cameras. It comes with smart lights and thermostats and all of these things. And then you get into the things that Ben was talking about, where you start talking about integration. You start to figure out how can these different pieces inform the rest of the building to make better decisions, to save on operational costs, to save time and energy from your staff, to inform resident decisions, and ultimately drive NOI and increase the building value. But when you look at the network and the number of clients connected at any given point, we're growing immensely, and you get more sensors, you get more integrations from one thing to the next. I use a simple example of how our building systems can inform our thermostats based on external weather patterns and temperatures to pump fresh air into the corridors instead of using chilled air or heated air because of climate conditions, and how that can save energy. But then you look at how does that inform the rest of the building and all of the other decisions. So you have all these integration points. You have a ton of things that are potential failure points or breach points. And so we look at this from the standpoint of how do we make this the most secure building that we can, while providing our residents with the technology that makes their lives better and drives building value and increases operational efficiencies. So COVID just exploded that entire thing into a freight train moving at 100 miles an hour forward. And we're seeing the number of new companies that are popping up daily to provide services that do all of those things that I just outlined. I get a call every couple hours from somebody who's interested in, I want to sell you this, or put this in your building, or take a look at this. And a huge part of my job now is really vetting and figuring out, who's funding these companies, where are their products made? Are their products made domestic or international? What chipsets are they using? There were major issues with CCTV breaches just in the last 6 months. Cloud-based security cameras become a thing, and you've got access to a God-level password and a user account. You can access the entire system. On top of that, the government issues warnings against using security cameras that are made in certain parts of the world, which might be white labeled under some other name. And so a lot of the work that we do when we select our technologies is just diligence. It's just reviewing and understanding where products are made, who's funding them, what the support structure is like, and what that company or that product's organization's security infrastructure is, and how does that fit with ours, and do we match on that? And then then we pick things and we roll it out, and we continually test and try to break. We're breaking everything all the time to make sure that if something does go wrong, we know how to fix it and what to do when that happens.
So from a life cycle perspective, you're the guy that Ben's mad at because the students get all of this great technology in university, and then when they go into the workplace, they want to make sure that they have those same services. Is that correct?
Well, it's actually it's funny, but it's a super real point. So when you think about technology in commercial real estate as a whole, and you look at student housing, and you go back 10 years, 15 years, and you think about how internet was deployed in student housing, in all commercial real estate. And you think about student housing being really the first true vertical to start deploying bulk wireless service or managed wireless service throughout the building and providing a full service for the residents from a wireless connectivity standpoint. That is now transitioning into multifamily real estate, which is transitioning into commercial real estate, which is transitioning into industrial and medical. And so as you look at technology's progression through, it really starts at home, it starts at home with mom and dad or when you're growing up, and the technology that's adopted there then needs to get put into your next level of life, which is student housing. And then once that sector figures it out, then it goes to the next one, and then it goes to the next one. So it's an interesting cycle as technology progresses from point A to point B.
Yeah, and EJ, I want to jump in on that point, in that the way flex work is going to change this is by virtue of now you're competing with the home technology base, right, that somebody might have. So if I look around my office, I've got a whole bunch of IoT around me. I could tell, Google to play me music. I can run over to my kitchen and there's IoT there. And now as an office occupant, I want all those same things, right? I want amenities, I want IoT, I want to be able to speak to my physical environment. So that's the game that we're in now. And I think that evolution of technology is only speeding up. I'll tell you that I recently upgraded to a gig of internet with a different provider and had to put a new router in. And I didn't realize even how much IoT I had until you have to do that, right? I don't know if anybody's been through that experience, but you spend like 3 hours recoding, 25 devices to the new network. And you're like, wow, I have a lot of stuff on the internet in this house. So I think, it's only going to grow, and that's just the nature of the game.
Would you go ahead, Lucian?
Yeah, let me pile on there. So people don't realize that if you buy a car anytime after 2019, you've got over 3,000 chips in your car. That's actually driving a worldwide chip shortage. Think about that, 3,000 chips just in your car. Any one of those. Now, of course, some of those, support your power seats. I know, EJ, you've got probably a top of the line car there, but for me, that I drive my basic model, maybe 1,000 chips, but they still are supporting critical systems in your car, and any one of those can be exploited. And so can your smart TV, so can your Ring system, so can anything you put in your home. These are all exploitation points that we are working diligently to try to come up with a safety framework that's going to be a consumer offering to be able to address that.
And then when I look at the building technology, especially the core systems, right? When we try to look at, say, cybersecurity, we're looking at people, processes, and technologies, right? And the technologies are going to be the hardest to overcome from an upgrading just because of the expense of retrofitting that. When you look at the first two pieces of that, the people and processes, commercial real estate is really a disaggregated market space where you guys pull in a lot of subcontractors to do various different services. How do you actively drive your subcontractors from a compliance perspective, from all of the different things that they're doing, especially as those services are now being a managed service, whether it's a cloud-based provider on access control or video surveillance? I'll throw it to Mark and Ben from a technology perspective, and then from Ed from an endpoint protection perspective, and how you guys think about that.
Ben, you want to go first? You want me to go?
I'll go first and tell you that one of the things that we are practicing is deferral of responsibility a little bit, because we're not vertically integrated, which means we don't do our own property management at MetLife Investment Management equity. So we look to our partners, we look to the big names in real estate who manage our properties to say, you need to have a base standard of upkeep for the networks that you administrate in our buildings. And this comes back, Lucian, to what I think BCS is trying to achieve, right? Well, if they do that, what exactly is that base standard? How exactly do they enact something that makes the building owner feel comfortable that everything's on the up and up, and that they're not overdoing it, they're not boiling the ocean? Because you can really go down the rabbit hole on cyber. You can overprotect, certainly, beyond what you really need to do. So, I mean, I think that that's, part of it is we will, rely on our property teams to do a good job of vetting vendors, keeping the networks up to speed, patching when needed. I think that's a really big part of it. I don't know, Mark, on the multifamily side, how you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that we try to, put in place so that as we are going and we manage our own assets, we do a lot of our own development. So we're hiring our general contractors and our electricians and managing the entire construction process. So when we're doing a low voltage infrastructure with technology infrastructure and the cameras and access control and all those things, a lot of this is dependent on our network provider and our technology partner at each asset. So we build our partnerships up with some really great network integrators and technology groups that, we've built our set standards. We have our standards for what goes into our buildings, how we're securing them, what equipment we use, any permissions and things that need to be put in place for accessing different pieces of equipment in the building. We have vendors that we work with that have and understand our set standards. And we're super excited about what Lucian's working on with BCS, helping to drive that standard organization of this is a great set of standards for building security. That's something that I just don't think a lot of people quite get to with the amount of work that it goes into and managing a property and building a property. Cybersecurity just kind of becomes an afterthought, and I think we really need to drive it to the front. And so having a good understanding of what it is that you as an organization, what your goals are, what your risks are, what your threats are, and how to protect those, and know that going into your developments or your management or your asset. And so that you can build those relationships and make sure that you have in place what you need.
Hey, Mark and EJ, one quick thing, because we skipped over the people part. I think it's important to note that commercial real estate people generally are not technologists, right? I mean, Mark, you and I have really good conversations about tech all the time, but I wouldn't say that that's commonplace for me. I deal in a lot of socialization and a lot of education with real estate folks. My background's in quantitative analytics. I came into real estate 5 years ago. So I came out of a lot of fintech, and I know what needs to be done to secure, a network and have a good architecture put together. And I think people on the real estate side is something that we need to really think about, how we best position the right resources at the building, managing the assets to do this right, because it isn't something that is normally sort of, in the wheelhouse skill set for a real estate person.
Ed, you had a point? Ed, you want to add something there real quick?
Yeah, no, I think, especially when it comes down to the endpoint security notion that we've sort of been dealing with for quite some time on the IT side. Several different unique sort of differences when it comes down to where will these threat actors probably be, affecting or leveraging this distributed, architecture and the IT and OT architecture. And that's more at the vulnerable technology systems themselves. So these embedded systems that are at the edge, attacking them directly, albeit will be, a concern. But I think the challenge is twofold: not only the edge in a traditional endpoint security, and how do we sort of take that model. What we're doing from a Trend Micro perspective, we understand that everything IoT, industrial IoT, you have a control plane piece here, which is the cloud, right? And so applying security solutions at the network layer and at the cloud layer are probably the easiest ways we can actually go after and secure these edge devices. We talk about people and process and technology, and absolutely the risk, cyber risk, really lies at the intersection of people and process under traditional IT. But it changes a little bit when you're talking about this converge model. It's still people and process, but as everybody's been sort of talking about here, it's about the configuration, the interdependencies, the architectures as is being built out becomes the vulnerable weak point, as opposed to an end user clicking on a particular malicious link or attachment. So you just have to switch it up a little bit and really think about it in different terms. Still people process, but it's more about the systems architectures, the devices and rollout. I mean, when you talk about shadow IT, which is a huge problem, and it gets back to what you guys were talking about, misconfigurations, but also a basic tenet for security. If you can't see it, you can't protect it, right? And so now, as Ben was saying, you add all these, IT devices, IoT devices, even in a smart home, you don't even realize how much you have out there. Well, imagine a business, a building, divisions within a business and buildings and multiple facilities for a certain organization. It's a huge, challenge. And kudos to you guys really working on the problem on trying to get that standardization. But I tell you what, standardization is a little easier, problem to target when you have this long history on the IT side of developing these standards. Now we have to look at those standards. Look, how does those standards really apply on the OT side, industrial IoT side? So, kudos to you guys. But yeah, I think this challenge, it goes way beyond just the traditional security mindset.
Lucian, well, let's pull that thread a little bit. Can you explain a little bit of not necessarily the standard, but the framework and the thought process of OT versus IT and how Building Cyber is thinking about that?
Yeah, sure. So, okay, let's talk real quick. First of all, I want to make sure we're clear. I've been seeing some questions coming on chat.
Yep.
I think everybody on the panel will agree that building codes and standards, particularly government initiated, are archaic, arcane, and may not necessarily provide the operative security. Probably a show of hands would get unanimous that we're looking at a framework. We're not trying to create a standard. We're looking at a framework that allows for, based on your risk, levels of safety and security that we're offering at each level that will give you some degree of protection based on what you want to invest in and what you feel your risk is. That's the big point here. I'm a lifelong government employee, and I just don't think government's going to be able to move quick enough to solve this problem. The cyber threat is evolving every month, and you just can't come up with a smart building code. You can't come up with a smart building standard or regulation. You really got to be moving a lot quicker than that, and that's why the organization we've established, we believe we are going to be able to stay on top of an evolving threat and quickly evolve our framework to meet those emerging threats. I think that's probably the big thing about the framework. And we are looking at the entire life cycle of an asset, starting from design, moving through the construction, integration, and ultimately how it's run and how the IT and OT are integrated into that asset. And then and what we're doing is we're just proposing some basic controls, and then you get more sophisticated in the technologies that you specify, whether they are in themselves encrypted, monitored, equipped with sensors to tell you when you have a data anomaly. And ultimately, my concern here is where's the warning when something goes bad? Where's the warning in the human interface? I go back to the idea of a car with 2,000 chips. Why don't we have a dashboard light right now that says, hey, your data is being manipulated in one of your critical systems. You need to pull over and turn the car off. That's the kind of thing we need to get to quickly, is what is going to be there to protect a potentially a nefarious activity part of an attack or intrusion on the human condition. And that's a whole other aspect to BCS that we're continuing to promote. And I don't believe government should come up with these standards. I don't think they're quick enough. I think the private sector can develop consumer options that allows for additional human interfaces and human warnings based on the threat you personally feel you have in your car, in your home. Just like you decide in your car what kind of safety package you want to buy, where you buy one car over another because what they offer for safety. You should have the same type of consumer option, what degree of protection you want to have in your home, in your car, or in your building. So that's really what BCS is focused on, is coming up with what those protections should be, and then ultimately offering it as a consumer choice based on the level of threat or level of risk you feel you have every day.
Hey, Lucian, if you would like to see, something move at a glacial speed, point the government at commercial real estate, and you will see a glacial speed.
Yeah, I just don't see building codes being able to solve this problem, and I don't see mandatory requirements. It's going to have to be in every project. In other words, BCS is working with an organization dedicated to American infrastructure. We've got to put these clauses in for cyber protection, cyber safety into these requirements documents, into these RFPs, and into these engineering specs in order to truly get after it. And that's part of what our organization is trying to do is move a lot quicker than government can.
Hey, there's some questions from the audience. Let me start asking some of those. So the first question is, do you believe electronic security, i.e. video surveillance or access control, will be part of the OT stack?
Yeah,
I'll throw that around.
Yeah, I think my opinion, yeah, it falls outside the traditional notion of OT, but I do think that it falls under building management and control systems, right? So it's that broader umbrella. And what makes that become that challenge going forward from an OT perspective is the fact that, it's the definition of who is protecting it. Had a good friend and colleague, former colleague, working at a major financial institution who had tens of thousands of employees and facilities across the globe, and had security systems, CCTV systems around all these facilities. However, the actual systems themselves were not falling under the traditional cybersecurity teams. They were falling under the physical security teams. Well, that's a bad thing because obviously we know from recent attacks, especially in DC, going after the CCTV systems can be quite easy. So having them all fall into the same thing has to be, in my opinion, my definition is yes, OT.
Hey, Ed, really quick, one way that goes sideways really fast, what you just described is, there's a tech out there called AnyVision, which is video surveillance technology that's used for access management control. And to me, the future of access management and control is largely biometric and video based, right? The idea that you need to use a mobile device or a card or something like that, some physical object is, in my opinion, will be something we won't be doing in, 5 to 7 years. But in that case, right, if you've got a technology that's reading people's faces and letting them in the building, and that's hacked, think about what that does to your risk with respect to physical security of the building, right? So to me, I think they're really hand in glove.
Yep, I agree. Completely agree.
Hey, EJ.
Yep.
There's a great question that came into the chat, and I would just like to go ahead and hit it real hard, real quick. It says, do you believe technology is evolving faster than the people and procedures can be educated enough to develop standards to protect it? And the answer is absolutely yes. I do believe that we are implementing levels of increased sophistication very quickly. When you look at what small cell 5G is going to be able to do for data speeds and data size, how it's going to enable artificial intelligence applications, machine learning, quantum engineering, we are moving incredibly fast when it comes to technology. And I'm not sure we want to stop it. It offers such an unbelievable array of advantages and opportunities for the human interface to enhance the human experience across all of society. So the goal here is not necessarily to slow it down. I don't think we want to. The goal is to create a safety and security framework that can catch up with it. That's really what we're trying to do as quickly is try to get up to it and then in front of it. So we're designing cyber safety and cyber security into all these future technologies and applications.
Great answer. Another question that came in is, what are examples of low-hanging fruit types of changes, people, processors, or technologies that an organization can make to drastically improve cybersecurity?
Well, I think from a cybersecurity perspective, again, we talk about, we mentioned it in the question, the people, process, and technology. Well, you have to address all of them, right? You cannot, I think the challenges that we see and the problems that we have on traditional IT security is the fact that we focus on the technology piece as opposed to the people and process. And just as was mentioned earlier in this call, I think it was Ben, that pretty much every breach can be, blamed on a people process piece. Even the Equifax, breach where they failed to, apply the patch soon enough to close that vulnerability. Well, that's a people process piece. That's not necessarily a technology. Yes, there's always going to be vulnerable software, operating systems, and technology, and it's just going to get worse. So if you're not focusing on the people process technology, my opinion, obviously, just like what we're espousing here, in a totality from a framework perspective, you got to go at it from a framework perspective. It's understanding who has responsibility. Often, a lot of times, people are so busy, and especially the cybersecurity and IT security teams, they're focused on that 3-meter target. They're not focused on the 25 and 50 until that, problem happens. And so there's got to be this, overarching umbrella of identifying the people, the stakeholders on the physical side, the facility side. Everybody who has a stakeholder around these systems has to be at the table to be able to say, okay, how are we architecting it? Are we doing it securely? And then whose role to monitor and secure it and to reduce that risk?
That's a great answer. Go
I
ahead,
would
Mark.
also add, it doesn't really, regardless of what industry you're in or what your job is or what you do, I think one of the most straightforward answers to that question is if you're not sure, hire an expert. And when you look at cybersecurity, I think there's a lot of people who aren't sure. And there's a lot of organizations out there that can come in and provide a fantastic service to help you understand what your risks and threats are, what you need to do to be prepared and be ready. And whether it's your internal IT team, whether it's your internal cybersecurity team or technology team, if you ask yourself the question, what happens if we get hacked, and you don't know what the answer to that is, or you don't really know what that means in the first place, then getting someone to help you write your policies and help you understand what your steps are to get from point A to point B to recover yourself. That is a low-hanging fruit that I would say is undeniably step one. And it's probably a lot cheaper than you think, I'll be completely honest.
Yeah, I would surmise both those as governance from someone's got to own what it is, right? So the first question we ask commercial real estate owners is, if you look at the IT side, there's a pretty defined ownership from a responsibility perspective. When you get into the building systems, that gets really murky and gray of who actually owns it. It's like Charlie in the box, the orphaned redheaded stepchild that no one wants to own, right? So understanding the governance of who owns what, and then awareness, right? So one of the simple things we do from our organization is we do a 4-minute video every week from a cyber awareness perspective. People don't think about, oh my God, if you look at the Pitney Bowes attack was they left a charger on the table, right? That charger actually worked for an iPhone, but when they stuck it in, they had embedded malware in that device to drive the ransomware attack. So just getting people to understand the basics of awareness and education. And I would say, Lucian, you're trying to drive that from the building cyber perspective as well, right? You're muted.
Go ahead. I'm listening.
No, I was going to say one of the things is just education from an awareness perspective as well.
Yeah, that's part of what our organization does. We're going around the world actually, letting people know, hey, there's not just a problem. I think a lot of these webinars, everybody can't sleep at night because they all of a sudden see the vulnerabilities they have. There's got to be somebody out there offering a solution. So yes, part of our job within this organization is raise public awareness, but we've also got to quickly follow, okay, here's how we get after it. And that's in offering a solution on these calls and offering an opportunity to join an organization that's really working on a solution, I feel is what we really should be concentrating on, because I think we could talk with the problem set until the cows come home. What do you do to get after it? And how quickly can you get after it? And look, Mark and Ben hit it head on. Are you even asking the basic questions? Ask your building managers, can my elevator be seized? Can someone wake up in the morning and through an IT attack? The Colonial Pipeline, that hit them blind. 5:30 in the morning, they got an email saying, hey, you seized your IT. And within about an hour, they realized they're flowing fuel through a pipeline at no cost. We're not, as a society, we're not ready for free fuel yet. And so they shut it down. And so we got to realize, hey, it might be as innocent as, an apartment building. This can never happen to me, even though I'm sitting on a $100 million asset. And all of a sudden, your tenants no longer want to ever go back into the building, whether it be an apartment building or an office building, because they just was a threat of an elevator attack. So these are the things that we've got to raise awareness on. Yeah, they're out there. No CEO really wants to know about it, but once they know about it, there's also a solution.
Thank you. I was looking at
And I'll take it. I'll take it real quick. I'll take it full circle all the way back to the growth of technology from your house when you're a kid up to student housing, up to so on and so on and so on, all the way through senior housing. As we get the younger generation up and through those buildings and through those assets, going to work in the commercial buildings, going to work in industrial, going to live in our multifamily and our student, they know about this stuff. So those questions are going to get asked, and they're going to want to know what the prevention and what the preventative measures and how secure your building is.
Well, guys, we're coming to the end of the session. Thank you so much for your time. And for those that have put in additional QA questions, we'll get written answers back out. And thank you all for participating.
Yeah, this is just, I mean, as you know, we just saw a survey come up. I, for one, pressed outstanding as far as how good this panel was, but that's just me personally. So, yeah, I very much appreciate EJ, you moderating, and this is great to get on the line with Ben and Mark and Ed. They're just true experts, and it really is fantastic what we're working on together.
All the best, guys. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Everybody.
All
Take
right.
care.
Take care.